The journey of dedication. The blazing sun beat down on the well-trodden grounds of Fort Bragg, North Carolina, as Sergeant Andrew Coleman adjusted his uniform one last time. At 32 years old, Andrew had become the embodiment of a soldier's unwavering dedication. His strong, muscular frame and dark skin glistened with sweat under the intense heat, a reflection of the countless hours he had spent training and serving in some of the world's most dangerous conflict zones. Andrew's stoic demeanor belied the intense emotions swirling within him. Today wasn't just any day. It was the day of the annual military award ceremony. It was an event he had attended numerous times over the years, watching as his peers were recognized for their valor and service. But this year, something felt different. Rumors had circulated that Andrew was up for one of the highest honors. Yet, as was often the case, he remained humble, grounded by the values instilled in him from a young age. Growing up in Atlanta, Andrew was raised by two pillars of strength, his parents, Marcus and Evelyn Coleman. His father, a Vietnam veteran, had always stressed the importance of integrity and resilience. "Son," Marcus had said, placing a firm hand on Andrew's shoulder the day he announced his decision to enlist. "Serving your country is about more than the uniform. It's about honor, courage, and never forgetting where you come from." Those words echoed in Andrew's mind every time he donned his uniform, every time he stepped into the fray to protect his fellow soldiers. His mother, Evelyn, had been just as influential. "Andrew," she would say, her voice filled with love and pride, "always stand tall, but remember your roots. They'll guide you when the world tries to pull you down." These values had shaped Andrew into the man and soldier he had become. He had served multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, leading teams in missions that tested the very core of his strength, determination, and leadership. His team always came first. Even when facing insurmountable odds, Andrew's calm under fire and strategic mind had earned him the respect of everyone who served alongside him. As Andrew walked across the base toward the ceremony hall, he exchanged nods and greetings with his fellow soldiers. His reputation as a fair, courageous leader preceded him. Yet, despite the accolades and respect, Andrew remained grounded, never one to seek attention or praise. "Superman," a familiar voice called out, breaking Andrew from his thoughts. He turned to see Lieutenant John Williams jogging toward him with a broad smile on his face. Williams, a tall, lanky man with a perpetual sense of humor, had become one of Andrew's closest friends during their deployment in Afghanistan. They had been through the worst of times together, their bond forged in the fires of battle. "John," Andrew greeted him warmly, clasping his friend's hand. "You ready for this ceremony?" "With you leading us, always," John chuckled, falling into step beside him. "Any word on our next mission?" Andrew shook his head. "Not yet, but I've heard some chatter. We might be heading east soon." Their conversation drifted as they made their way to the briefing room. There, they were met by Captain Sarah Martinez, a sharp, no-nonsense officer who commanded respect with her mere presence. "Gentlemen," she began, her expression serious, "we've got intel on an enemy outpost in the eastern region, heavily fortified. We're being tasked with infiltration and neutralization." Andrew's mind immediately went into overdrive as he studied the terrain maps and planned the mission. The enemy's position was well protected, hidden within a mountain pass, with multiple vantage points for snipers. The approach was risky, with little cover and a high chance of casualties if they weren't careful. As he formulated a strategy, a familiar unease settled in his stomach. This was going to be one of their toughest missions yet, but as always, Andrew pushed the doubts aside. His focus was solely on the safety of his team. The following morning, as dawn broke, Andrew and his squad began their trek through the rugged landscape. The mission required stealth, precision, and absolute focus. Each soldier moved with careful deliberation, their senses heightened by the knowledge that danger lurked in every shadow. They had nearly reached the enemy outpost when the silence of the early morning was shattered by the unmistakable sound of gunfire. Bullets tore through the air, ricocheting off rocks as Andrew and his squad dove for cover. "Take cover," Andrew shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. His training kicked in, and he quickly assessed the situation. They were pinned down, caught in a deadly crossfire between two enemy positions. "Williams," Andrew called out over the din of gunfire. "Can you see the source of that fire from your position?" "Negative," John shouted back, his voice strained with urgency. "They'd got us pinned down." Andrew's mind raced as he scanned the landscape. They couldn't stay where they were. It was only a matter of time before the enemy flanked them. But if they tried to move, they'd be exposed to even more gunfire. That's when Andrew spotted it, a narrow ravine off to the left, just wide enough to provide cover and a path to outflank the enemy. But reaching it meant someone would have to draw the enemy's fire. Without hesitation, Andrew made the decision. "Listen up," he called to his squad. "On my signal, we're moving to that ravine. Leapfrog style. I'll cover you." "Sarge, that's suicide," John protested, but Andrew's expression remained firm. He wasn't asking for permission. "It's our only shot," Andrew replied, his voice calm but authoritative. "Get them out of here, John. That's an order." Before anyone could argue further, Andrew sprang into action. He leaped from behind the boulder, firing a barrage of bullets toward the enemy positions. The enemy's attention immediately shifted to him, and as the bullets whizzed past, Andrew shouted, "Go! Go! Go!" A soldier's sacrifice. As Andrew Coleman burst from cover, the ground beneath his boots seemed to tremble, though it wasn't the earth shifting. It was the weight of his decision. His movements were precise, honed by years of combat, and yet, for the first time in a long while, he felt the sting of mortality nipping at his heels. With every step, every squeeze of the trigger, he knew that the barrage of enemy fire was now fully focused on him. That was the plan. The air buzzed with the sharp crack of gunfire, the distinct hum of bullets ripping through the air. Andrew kept his movements erratic, darting from side to side, firing back with purpose, but knowing his shots were only meant to hold the enemy's attention. In the brief glances he stole to his left, he saw his team moving toward the ravine, just as planned. Lieutenant John Williams led the charge, glancing back at Andrew with a mix of admiration and fear. The weight of leading the squad in such a dangerous situation was now on John's shoulders, and it showed in the tight set of his jaw. He hadn't wanted to leave Andrew behind, but orders were orders. There was no room for heroics that went against the plan. Not now. "Keep moving," John barked at the squad, his voice barely audible over the chaos. The squad members, trained to trust their leaders, followed his command without hesitation. One by one, they leaped from their positions, making for the cover of the ravine. Andrew watched them in fleeting moments, heart pounding in his chest as adrenaline coursed through his veins. His only thought was to give them the time they needed to escape the trap they were in. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through Andrew's shoulder, and his body jerked violently as the force of a bullet knocked him back a step. He gritted his teeth, refusing to fall. The pain was searing, but the mission wasn't over. He fired another round, his grip tightening on the rifle, each shot precise and calculated. The training, the years of combat, all pushed the pain to the back of his mind. Another bullet grazed his leg, but still, Andrew didn't stop. His squad was almost to safety, and that was all that mattered. He ducked behind a rock, breathing heavily, his blood dripping onto the dusty earth. He didn't have long. If he stayed any longer, he'd be surrounded. He had to make a move. Andrew's vision blurred slightly from the loss of blood, but through the haze, he spotted an opportunity. A small rise of rocks not far ahead would give him better cover and a new angle on the enemy. He pushed himself to his feet, his injured leg nearly buckling beneath him. But he ran, each step a defiance of the pain coursing through his body. Behind him, the enemy fire intensified, realizing that Andrew was still in play. The bullets rained down around him, kicking up clouds of dirt, but none hit their mark. With a final burst of speed, Andrew dove behind the rise of rocks. breathing heavily as he pressed his back against the cool stone. For a moment, the world went quiet around him. The deafening roar of gunfire receded, and all he could hear was the rapid beating of his own heart. His shoulder throbbed, and his legs screamed in pain. But Andrew was alive. More importantly, his squad was safe. He reached for his radio, voice hoarse as he called out, "Williams, status report. Are they out?" There was a brief crackle before John's voice came through, strained but clear. "We made it, Sarge. All of us. But we're pinned down here. You need to get out of there. Now." Andrew smiled faintly, though there was little comfort in the moment. The mission wasn't over yet. If the squad was pinned down, they were still in danger. The enemy was relentless, and they wouldn't stop until every soldier was either captured or dead. Andrew knew this, as surely as he knew that his own survival was secondary. "Hold your position," Andrew ordered, gripping his rifle tighter. "I'm going to draw them out. When they move, hit them with everything you've got." "Sarge, you can't," John began, but Andrew cut him off. "That's an order, Lieutenant." There was a long pause on the other end of the radio, and Andrew could almost feel John's frustration, but they both knew this was the only way. Andrew wasn't going to make it out without taking a final stand, and he wasn't going to let his squad down now, not after everything they'd been through. The enemy fire began again, this time closer. They were advancing, trying to flush Andrew out. He could hear the crackle of their radios, the heavy footsteps of boots moving cautiously over the uneven ground. Andrew's mind raced, analyzing the terrain and the enemy's movements. With a deep breath, he leaned out from behind the rocks and fired a burst of shots, picking off 2 of the enemy soldiers before ducking back behind cover. He needed to keep moving, keep them guessing, keep them focused on him. As he ran to a new position, another bullet hit him, this time grazing his side. He winced but pushed forward, determined to complete the mission. He could see them now, 6 enemy soldiers closing in. They had no idea that Andrew's squad was waiting for the right moment to strike. "Get ready," Andrew whispered into his radio, his voice barely audible over the pounding of his heart. "They're almost on you." And then it happened. The enemy soldiers, focused on Andrew's movements, left themselves vulnerable. John and the rest of the squad, hidden in the ravine, opened fire. The ambush was swift, brutal, and decisive. The enemy, caught completely off guard, fell in a matter of seconds. The radio crackled again, this time with John's voice. "Sarge, we did it. The enemy's neutralized." Andrew allowed himself a brief moment of relief, though the pain in his body was now nearly overwhelming. He sank to the ground, leaning heavily against the rocks, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His vision dimmed as he looked up at the sky, the brilliant blue seeming to fade as exhaustion took over. But even as darkness began to close in, Andrew smiled. He had done it. His team was safe. And that was all that mattered. The next thing Andrew remembered was the sound of helicopter blades whirring overhead. He wasn't sure how much time had passed, but when he opened his eyes, he saw John kneeling beside him, his face tight with worry. "You did it, Sarge," John said, his voice thick with emotion. "We got them all." Andrew tried to respond, but his voice wouldn't come. He could only nod as John and the medics worked quickly to stabilize him. As the helicopter lifted off, taking Andrew and the rest of the squad back to safety, one thought lingered in his mind. He had survived the battle, but the war was far from over. What Andrew couldn't have known in that moment was that his actions on that fateful day would ripple far beyond the battlefield. He had proven once again what it meant to be a true leader, and though he didn't know it yet, the recognition he had long deserved was coming, sooner than he could have imagined. In the coming days, as Andrew recovered from his injuries, whispers began to spread through the ranks about the courage and selflessness he had displayed. But even those whispers couldn't prepare him for what awaited him at the next military ceremony. Part 3 will delve into the unexpected recognition Andrew receives and how it changes not only his life, but also the perception of those around him. The aftermath and the silence before the storm. Andrew Coleman woke to the sterile scent of antiseptic and the steady beeping of a heart monitor. His body ached in ways he had never known before. His head was heavy, his muscles refused to move without screaming in protest, and the sharp rhythmic pain in his shoulder reminded him of the mission. He tried to sit up, but a gentle hand pushed him back down. "Take it easy, Sergeant," a soft voice said. It was one of the medics, a young woman with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. "You've been through a lot." Andrew blinked, his mind sluggish as he tried to piece together the events that had landed him in a hospital bed. His last memory was of the helicopter ride, John's worried face hovering over him as they were airlifted to safety. Beyond that, everything was a blur. "How long?" Andrew's voice was rough, his throat dry. He wasn't sure how to finish the question. 2 days, the medic replied, her voice soothing. "You were out for 2 days. You've had surgery to remove the bullet from your shoulder and to treat the wound in your leg. You're lucky to be alive." 2 days. It felt like a lifetime. Andrew's mind immediately shifted to his squad. He needed to know they were okay, that his efforts had saved them. "My team, are they?" "They're fine, Sergeant," the medic assured him with a smile. "You did good. They're all safe. Lieutenant Williams has been by your side since you got here. He'll be back soon." Relief washed over Andrew. The mission had been brutal, but the thought that his team was safe made every bit of pain worth it. He allowed himself a moment to close his eyes and breathe, letting the reality of survival sink in. But beneath the surface, a gnawing question lingered. Had it all been worth it? The mission had been a success, but it had nearly cost him his life. Would anyone care, beyond the small circle of soldiers who had witnessed it firsthand? He had been overlooked before, despite years of dedicated service and personal sacrifice. Andrew had learned long ago that the system didn't always reward those who deserved it. Medals and recognition often went to those higher in the ranks, or to those with the right connections. He had made peace with that, at least he thought he had. A few hours later, the door to his hospital room creaked open, and John Williams stepped inside, his face lighting up with a grin when he saw Andrew awake. "Hey, Superman," John said, his usual humor masking the deep concern still itched in his features. "Good to see you're back with us." "Good to be back," Andrew replied, his voice still a little weak but steady. John pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat down with a heavy sigh. "You gave us all quite the scare, Sarge. Thought we were going to lose you there for a minute." "Not yet," Andrew joked, though the pain behind his smile was real. "Guess I'm tougher than I thought." John shook his head, his expression growing serious. "No one can doubt that after what you did out there. You saved all our asses, Andrew. The whole squad made it because of you." Andrew shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't one for praise, especially from his closest friend. "I just did what I had to do. You have done the same." John leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Maybe. But not everyone would have risked what you did, and people are starting to notice." Andrew frowned. "What do you mean?" John hesitated, as if weighing his words. "There's been talk. Ever since we got back, word's been spreading about what happened on the mission. Higher-ups are paying attention, Andrew. They know what you did." Andrew sighed, leaning back against the pillows. "I've heard that before, John. You know how this goes. We do the work, and someone else gets the medals." John's face tightened. "Not this time." Andrew opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, the door swung open again, and Captain Sarah Martinez entered the room. Her presence instantly shifted the atmosphere. She was a commanding officer with a reputation for no-nonsense leadership, and her visits were usually all business. "Sergeant Coleman," she said, nodding at him as she approached the bed. "Good to see you awake." "Captain," Andrew replied, sitting up a little straighter despite the pain. "Ma'am." She stood at the foot of his bed, her hands clasped behind her back, studying him for a moment. "I've spoken with the medics, and they say you'll make a full recovery." "It's good to hear. We need soldiers like you." Andrew wasn't sure what to say, so he just nodded. "There's something else I wanted to talk to you about," Martins continued, her voice growing a shade softer. "I've put in a formal recommendation for you to be awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for your actions during the mission." The words hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. Andrew blinked, certain he had misheard. "The Distinguished Service Cross, Mom." "Yes," she confirmed. "Your bravery under fire, your leadership in the field, it's the kind of service we honor. I'm pushing it through the channels now, and I've spoken with the brass. They're behind it. We'll make the official announcement at the next award ceremony." For the first time in his career, Andrew was speechless. The Distinguished Service Cross was the second highest military award for valor. It was something he had never expected, not for himself. He had always done his duty because it was the right thing to do, not for recognition. But now, standing on the precipice of receiving such an honor, he didn't know how to feel. John grinned, clapping Andrew on the shoulder, gently, considering the wound. "Told you, Sarge. This one's different." Martinez nodded once more, her expression unreadable. "You deserve this, Sergeant Coleman. We all saw what you did out there. But there's more." Andrew looked up, confused. "More?" Martinez's lips pressed into a thin line. "I can't say much yet, but let's just say that what happened out there has reached the highest levels. The next ceremony won't just be about a medal." Before Andrew could ask what she meant, Martinez gave a sharp nod and turned on her heel, leaving the room as swiftly as she had entered. John chuckled as he stood, shaking his head. "Looks like you're in for a hell of a ride, Sarge." But Andrew wasn't sure how to feel. The news of the award was still sinking in, but the cryptic words from Captain Martinez left a nagging sense of uncertainty. What did she mean by reaching the highest levels? What was happening beyond his control? The next few weeks passed in a haze of physical therapy and quiet reflection. Andrew healed quickly, his body stronger than even he had anticipated. But the emotional weight of the impending ceremony weighed heavily on him. He had never been comfortable in the spotlight. In his mind, the true victories were the ones that didn't require public recognition. He had saved his squad, and that was enough for him. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The day of the ceremony arrived with all the fanfare one would expect. The base was alive with anticipation. Soldiers in crisp uniforms lined the parade ground, families gathered to watch their loved ones be honored, and the air was thick with a mix of pride and tension. Andrew stood at attention with the other soldiers being recognized that day, his uniform spotless, his medals gleaming. He had been in ceremonies like this before, but this time was different. His heart raced as he thought about what Captain Martinez had said. Something else was coming, something big, but he had no idea what. As the ceremony began, Andrew's mind wandered, his thoughts drifting back to the mission, to the bullets that had nearly ended his life, to the faces of his squad as they escaped to safety. The speaker's voice droned on in the background until finally, Andrew's name was called. Sergeant Andrew Coleman, for distinguished service and extraordinary heroism under fire. He stepped forward, his movements automatic. The medal was pinned to his chest, but before he could step back, the base commander motioned for him to stay. Andrew's heart pounded in his chest. This was it, the moment Captain Martinez had hinted at. The base commander smiled, then turned to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special announcement today, one that has reached the highest levels of command. Part 4 will explore the shocking announcement made at the ceremony and the monumental impact it will have on Andrew's life and career, as well as the ripple effect on those around him. The unforeseen honor." Sergeant Andrew Coleman stood before the crowd, his chest heavy not just with the weight of the medal that had been pinned to his uniform, but with a sense of overwhelming uncertainty. The crisp North Carolina air was filled with the sound of applause as the Distinguished Service Cross shone proudly on his chest, But the base commander had not released him yet. Andrew could feel the eyes of the gathered soldiers, their families, and the high-ranking officials fixed on him. A ripple of confusion and anticipation spread through the ranks as everyone waited to hear the next words. The base commander, a stern but respected figure, cleared his throat and stepped closer to the microphone. His voice, steady and authoritative, carried across the grounds, holding the attention of everyone present. Today, we gather to recognize the valor of our soldiers, those who have gone above and beyond the call of duty. It is our duty to honor their sacrifices. But today, something extraordinary has occurred, something that reaches beyond the bounds of this base, this ceremony, and even our military. It's not often that a single act of bravery ignites a response at the highest levels of government. But ladies and gentlemen, this is exactly what has happened here. Andrew's heart pounded in his chest. He had no idea what was coming, but his instincts told him that whatever it was, it would change his life forever. The crowd was eerily silent now, every ear straining to catch the base commander's next words. Sergeant Coleman, the base commander continued, turning to look Andrew directly in the eye. Your actions during your most recent mission not only saved your squad, but they have drawn the attention of the nation. It is with great honor that I announce, on behalf of the President of the United States, that you have been selected to receive the Medal of Honor. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by stunned silence. The Medal of Honor, the nation's highest and most prestigious military decoration. It was an award reserved for those who had demonstrated conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of their lives, above and beyond the call of duty. Andrew's mind struggled to process the words. The Medal of Honor. His vision blurred as the weight of the announcement sank in. This wasn't just an award. This was history. This was legacy. It was the kind of recognition that transcended personal achievements and became part of the very fabric of a nation's pride. Andrew had never expected such a moment in his life, had never even dreamed it. The thought that his actions had earned him this honor felt surreal, almost unimaginable. A murmur of disbelief ran through the crowd. Soldiers exchanged glances, some nodding in approval while others stared in awe. Andrew's squad members, who were standing in formation, could barely contain their emotions. John Williams, his closest friend, had a look of shock and pride so deep it seemed to reverberate in the air between them. The base commander motioned for quiet, though the crowd's energy had already shifted to something electric, something more profound. He continued speaking, his voice laced with admiration. Sergeant Coleman's actions exemplify the very core of what it means to be a soldier of this great nation. His bravery, his sacrifice, and his leadership in the face of overwhelming odds did not go unnoticed. In fact, his actions have set a new standard for courage under fire. As part of this recognition, a special ceremony will be held at the White House in the coming weeks, where the President will personally bestow this great honor upon him. The magnitude of the moment was staggering. The White House, the President. Andrew's mind raced, trying to keep pace with the storm of thoughts that flooded him. How could this be happening? He had always been one to keep his head down, do the work, and ensure his squad made it home. Never had he sought recognition. Never had he wanted the spotlight. And yet, here he was, standing in the midst of it, with the eyes of the nation soon to be on him. He glanced down at the medal already pinned to his chest, the Distinguished Service Cross, and felt a wave of humility wash over him. It was never about the accolades. It was about the men and women he had led into battle, the ones who had trusted him with their lives. That was the real reward. And now, the recognition that came with this Medal of Honor wasn't just for him. It was for them, too. It was for every soldier who had put their life on the line, and for every family who had sacrificed at home. The base commander saluted Andrew, the formal gesture heavy with meaning. Andrew returned the salute, his hand steady even as his heart raced. As he lowered his hand, a loud and spontaneous applause broke out across the field. Soldiers, officers, and civilians alike clapped with a fervor that shook the very ground beneath them. It wasn't just applause for a medal. It was applause for everything Andrew had done, for the values he embodied, for the leader he had become. Andrew's gaze swept across the crowd, feeling the weight of their respect, their admiration. He spotted Captain Sarah Martinez standing toward the back, her face stoic, but her eyes gleaming with pride. She had been one of the first to recognize what Andrew's leadership had meant to the squad that day, and now she seemed to take personal satisfaction in seeing him honored in this way. As the ceremony drew to a close, Andrew remained silent, absorbing the magnitude of what had just happened. His squad gathered around him, slapping him on the back, offering congratulations, and exchanging words of admiration. But Andrew still felt disconnected, as if this moment belonged to someone else. "Man, I told you this was coming," John said, stepping closer to Andrew and giving him a firm handshake. "You earned this, Sarge, every bit of it." Andrew shook his head, humility weighing on his words. "I didn't do anything different than you have done." John's grin softened, his eyes filled with sincerity. "You did more than any of us could have, Andrew. You led us out of hell, and we're here because of you. This is your moment. Don't downplay it." Andrew let John's words sink in, and for the first time, he allowed himself to feel the pride that came with them. He had always been uncomfortable with recognition, always preferring the quiet, steady work of leadership over public praise. But maybe, just maybe, this was a moment to be embraced. After the ceremony, Andrew found himself walking alone along the edge of the base, away from the crowd and the noise. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden glow over the horizon. It was quiet now, the kind of peaceful stillness that allowed for reflection. He stared down at his uniform, the Distinguished Service Cross catching the fading light, and thought about the upcoming Medal of Honor ceremony. His life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. As he walked, his thoughts drifted back to his childhood, to the lessons his parents had taught him. His father's voice echoed in his mind, reminding him of the importance of integrity, courage, and compassion. His mother's words lingered too. "Never forget where you came from." Those values had been his compass throughout his military career. And now, standing on the verge of such profound recognition, they were more important than ever. Andrew knew that the Medal of Honor wasn't just a symbol of his actions on the battlefield. It was a reminder of everything that had led him to this moment, the sacrifices, the trials, the victories, and the losses. It was a testament to the values his parents had instilled in him, the values that had shaped him into the man he was today. In the quiet of that moment, Andrew made a silent promise to himself. No matter how much recognition or praise he received, he would never lose sight of what truly mattered. The medal was an honor, yes, but it would never define him. His actions, his leadership, and his unwavering commitment to those he served with, that was what mattered most. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Andrew turned back toward the base, ready to face whatever came next. The Medal of Honor ceremony loomed large on the horizon, but Andrew knew he would face it with the same humility, strength, and integrity that had guided him throughout his life. Part 5 will delve into the life-changing aftermath of the Medal of Honor announcement and the events leading up to the White House ceremony, exploring how this newfound recognition challenges Andrew's sense of self and leadership. The weight of honor. The following weeks after the announcement passed in a blur for Sergeant Andrew Coleman. What had once been a simple routine of training, briefings, and missions now became a whirlwind of interviews, meetings, and preparations for the Medal of Honor ceremony. The quiet life of a soldier, which Andrew had always cherished for its focus and discipline, had been upended. The media, military officials, and even politicians were now interested in him. Sergeant Andrew Coleman, the hero who had saved his squad under impossible circumstances. Every day seemed to bring another call or another request for his time. Local news outlets wanted interviews. National news organizations began running stories about his bravery, some embellishing the details of the mission beyond recognition. Suddenly, Andrew's face was everywhere, and his name became a symbol of honor and courage. His story had been retold in countless ways, but none seemed to capture the true essence of what had happened. Andrew sat in his small apartment on base one night, staring at the stack of letters and messages that had piled up on his kitchen table. There were offers for public speaking events, invitations to banquets, and even a few job offers from private security firms. One letter from an elementary school teacher in California stood out. Her students had written him letters, thanking him for his service and courage, and she asked if he would consider making a video message for them. Andrew smiled at the thought of a classroom full of kids learning about his story. But as he read through the letters, one line from the teacher stuck with him. "You're a real-life superhero to these children now." A superhero. The idea made Andrew uncomfortable. He wasn't a superhero. He wasn't someone larger than life, a figure to be idolized. He was a soldier, nothing more, nothing less. He had done his duty because that's what soldiers do. They protect, they lead, they sacrifice. But the world, it seemed, was intent on turning him into something else, something he wasn't sure he could live up to. As the date of the Medal of Honor ceremony approached, Andrew found himself increasingly introspective. The magnitude of the recognition was beginning to weigh heavily on him. The Medal of Honor wasn't just any award. It carried with it a legacy, a responsibility. Every man or woman who had received it before had been etched into history, remembered not just for their actions but for the example they set. The pressure of that legacy felt suffocating at times. One afternoon, a week before the ceremony, Andrew received a call from his father, Marcus. His parents had always been his foundation, the voices in his head that guided him through every tough decision. Though they had both been proud when he enlisted, his father had always understood the weight of being a soldier. Marcus Coleman had been a veteran of the Vietnam War, and while he didn't talk much about his experiences, Andrew knew that his father's time in the military had shaped him in ways that only other veterans could understand. "Son," Marcus's deep voice crackled through the phone. "I just wanted to tell you how proud your mother and I are. This is a big deal, Andrew. Bigger than I think you realize." Andrew was silent for a moment, unsure how to respond. His father had never been one for long speeches or emotional conversations. Growing up, his father's advice had been more like commands, short and to the point, but always full of wisdom. "I know, Dad," Andrew replied, his voice measured. I'm not sure if I'm ready for all this. It's a lot." Marcus's voice softened, something that didn't happen often. "You were ready the day you made that decision out there, Andrew. You don't have to carry this by yourself. You've always been a leader, but sometimes being a leader means letting others help you carry the load." Andrew nodded, though his father couldn't see him. His father's words hit home. As much as Andrew prided himself on being independent and strong, he couldn't deny that the overwhelming attention and pressure were beginning to take their toll. Maybe his father was right. Maybe it was time to lean on others, to let them help him navigate this unfamiliar terrain. "I appreciate that, Dad," Andrew said, his voice quieter now. "I'll try to remember that." They spoke for a few more minutes before hanging up, and Andrew sat for a long while in silence, staring at the medal pinned on his dress uniform hanging in the corner. His father had a way of cutting through the noise, of reminding him of what was important. The morning of the Medal of Honor ceremony arrived with all the pomp and circumstance that Andrew had expected, but it was still overwhelming. The White House grounds were immaculate, the air filled with a quiet buzz of anticipation. Hundreds of guests, military officials, politicians, and media personnel had gathered for the occasion. It was a spectacle that Andrew never could have imagined being a part of. Andrew's family had flown in for the ceremony, his father Marcus, his mother Evelyn, and his younger sister Brianna. They stood with him in a small room in the West Wing before the ceremony, his mother fussing over his uniform, as though he were still a child about to head to school. "Ma, you don't need to fix anything," Andrew said, a chuckle escaping him despite the nerves. "I think it's good." "Nonsense," Evelyn said, her hands deftly adjusting the already perfectly placed medals on his chest. "You're representing our family out there. and you're going to look perfect." Brianna, standing off to the side, rolled her eyes but smiled. "Mom, he's fine. Let him breathe a little." Andrew's father said nothing, simply watching with a proud, quiet intensity. He was dressed in a sharp suit, his posture straight, as if he were standing at attention himself. Andrew caught his eye, and they shared a look, one of mutual understanding. His father didn't need to say anything. The respect between them was unspoken, the bond forged from years of shared values and experiences. Before long, it was time. The Coleman family was ushered out to the south lawn, where rows of chairs were set up facing a raised platform. The president, along with several high-ranking military officials, stood at the podium, awaiting the moment when Andrew would be called forward. The gravity of the moment hit Andrew full force as he stepped onto the platform. The president began speaking, recounting the story of Andrew's bravery during the mission. Andrew listened, his mind flashing back to the chaotic moments of that day. The gunfire, the pain, the split-second decisions that had saved his squad's lives. To hear it described now, in such reverent tones, felt surreal. It was as if they were talking about someone else. "And now," the president said, his voice clear and commanding, "it is my honor to present Sergeant Andrew Coleman with the Medal of Honor for his extraordinary heroism and selflessness in combat." The president stepped forward, holding the Medal of Honor in his hands. The crowd was silent, the weight of the moment palpable. Andrew stepped forward, his heart racing as the president placed the medal around his neck. The cool metal rested heavily against his chest, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. Applause erupted, but all Andrew could hear was the beating of his own heart. He stood there, the Medal of Honor gleaming against his uniform, a symbol of everything he had done, of the sacrifices he had made. But more than that, it was a symbol of the men and women he had served alongside, the ones who had fought with him, bled with him, and survived because of him. After the ceremony, as Andrew walked back to his family, he felt a strange mixture of emotions. Pride, yes, but also an overwhelming sense of responsibility. The Medal of Honor wasn't just an award. It was a promise to live up to the example he had set, to continue leading with courage and integrity, to never forget the soldiers who had fought with him, and to never forget where he had come from. As his mother embraced him, tears in her eyes, and his father offered a firm, proud handshake, Andrew knew that his life had changed forever. The Medal of Honor had become a part of him now, a piece of his identity that he would carry for the rest of his life. But more than that, it was a reminder that true leadership, true heroism, wasn't about medals or ceremonies. It was about the choices you made in the moments that mattered most, and the people whose lives you touched along the way. Part 6 will explore the aftermath of the ceremony, the challenges Andrew faces in adjusting to his new reality, and how he uses his platform to inspire and lead others in ways he never anticipated. A legacy beyond the medal. The days following the Medal of Honor ceremony were a whirlwind, but for Sergeant Andrew Coleman, they also felt like a strange kind of silence. Despite the congratulations, the admiration, and the overwhelming media coverage, there was a void that he couldn't quite place. It was as if the rush of the ceremony had left behind a stillness that made him confront something deeper. He had returned to base, still in the public eye, though his daily life had changed in ways that he couldn't have predicted. The Medal of Honor was now permanently attached to his name, a label that followed him everywhere he went. He was no longer just Sergeant Coleman. He was a national hero, a symbol of bravery. Every step he took seemed to be under a magnifying glass. No matter where he went, eyes followed, whispers lingered, and he could sense that people expected more from him than they ever had before. But what exactly did they expect? The truth was, Andrew wasn't sure. As a soldier, he had always known his purpose. His mission was clear: protect his squad, lead with integrity, and complete the objectives set before him. Now his mission was less defined. The battlefield was behind him, and yet, in its place was a different kind of battle, a battle with his own identity, with how to carry the weight of such an honor, and with the pressure to live up to a title he had never sought. One afternoon, while Andrew was walking across the base, a young soldier stopped him. The man couldn't have been more than 19 or 20, barely old enough to have seen real combat, but he looked at Andrew with wide, admiring eyes. "Sergeant Coleman," the young man stammered. "I just wanted to say it's an honor to meet you. What you did out there, you're the reason I want to be a leader like you." Andrew was taken aback. It wasn't the first time someone had said something like this since the ceremony, but hearing it from such a young soldier drove the point home. People weren't just watching him. They were looking up to him, seeing him as a role model, as someone to emulate. Andrew smiled and nodded. "Thank you, soldier. But remember, being a leader isn't about medals or ceremonies. It's about doing right by your team, no matter the cost. Keep that in mind, and you'll be a leader too." The young man beamed, nodding fervently, before hurrying off. Andrew watched him go, feeling a strange mix of pride and discomfort. The encounter left him reflecting on the responsibility that came with his new status, but it also left him with a nagging question. How was he supposed to live up to this idea of being a leader in the eyes of others when he didn't feel like anything had changed? In the weeks that followed, the attention didn't let up. News programs requested interviews, military publications asked for his input, and motivational speaking events wanted him to headline. At first, Andrew resisted. He didn't feel comfortable talking about himself in that way, and the thought of standing on a stage in front of thousands of people seemed a world apart from leading a squad in the field. But then, something shifted. One evening, as Andrew sat in his apartment reading through more letters, one in particular caught his attention. It wasn't from a school or a news outlet. It was from the widow of a fallen soldier. The soldier had served in Andrew's unit during his first deployment, though they had been in different platoons. The widow's words were raw, filled with the pain of loss, but also gratitude. She thanked Andrew not for what he had done on the battlefield, but for the way he had inspired others, including her late husband, who had admired Andrew's leadership from afar. Her words were simple, but they carried a profound weight. "You don't know how much your courage means to people like me, who have lost someone. Knowing there are soldiers like you out there gives us hope that the sacrifices weren't in vain." Andrew sat with that letter for a long time. It wasn't just the words that moved him. It was the realization that his actions, his story, meant something more than just survival. He had always focused on leading his squad and protecting his team, but now he understood that his story had reached beyond the battlefield. It had touched people in ways he couldn't have imagined, and maybe that was something worth embracing. A month after the Medal of Honor ceremony, Andrew accepted his first public speaking invitation. It was for a Veterans Day event, held at a large military base in Texas, and it would be attended by thousands of service members, veterans, and their families. The idea of standing on stage, speaking about his experiences, made Andrew's stomach turn, but he knew this was an opportunity to honor those who had served, including the ones who hadn't come home. The auditorium was packed. As Andrew stood backstage, waiting to be introduced, his mind raced. He had spent years leading soldiers into battle, but this was a different kind of battlefield, one where he would have to speak from the heart, not just follow orders or execute a strategy. When his name was finally called, the roar of applause was deafening. He stepped onto the stage, the lights bright and blinding, but the sight of the audience grounded him. Soldiers in uniform, veterans in their old service attire, families holding photos of loved ones, all of them looking to him for something more than just a speech. Andrew took a deep breath, approached the podium, and began to speak. "I've never been a man who sought the spotlight," he started, his voice calm but steady. "For me, being a soldier was always about the mission, about keeping my squad safe, making sure we came home together. But sometimes, life has a way of putting you in the spotlight, whether you want it or not. And when that happens, you have to figure out what you're going to do with it." The room was silent. hanging on his every word. I didn't survive that mission because I was stronger or faster or braver than anyone else. I survived because of my team, because of the soldiers who fought beside me, who trusted me to lead them. Leadership isn't about medals or recognition. It's about doing the right thing, even when no one's watching. It's about making decisions in the heat of the moment that you're willing to live with for the rest of your life. Andrew paused, glancing out at the sea of faces. Some were teary-eyed, others nodded in silent agreement. I wear this Medal of Honor not for myself, but for every soldier who didn't make it home, for every family who lost a loved one, for every veteran who still carries the weight of their service. This medal is a reminder that bravery doesn't end on the battlefield. It's in every choice we make, every sacrifice we honor, and every life we touch. As he spoke, Andrew could feel the weight lifting, not just from his shoulders, but from his heart. He wasn't just speaking for himself anymore. He was speaking for the countless men and women who had served, who had sacrificed, who had given everything. He was a voice for those who couldn't speak, and in that moment, he understood that his story wasn't just his own. It belonged to all of them. When the speech ended, the applause was thunderous, but Andrew felt something deeper than the noise. He felt a connection, a bond that transcended rank, medals, or titles. For the first time, he understood the true power of his platform and the responsibility that came with it. In the months that followed, Andrew found a new mission. Using his platform to inspire and uplift others, he continued to speak at events, visited schools, and spent time with veterans who were struggling with the transition to civilian life. He became an advocate for mental health services for veterans, using his story to shed light on the challenges that soldiers faced long after the battles were over. But through it all, Andrew never lost sight of who he was at his core: a soldier, a leader, and a man who believed in doing the right thing, no matter the cost. The Medal of Honor was a symbol, yes, but it wasn't the source of his strength. His strength came from the values his parents had instilled in him, from the men and women he had served with, and from the lives he had touched along the way. Years later, as Andrew looked back on the journey that had begun with that fateful mission, he realized that the medal had given him something far greater than recognition. It had given him a purpose, a legacy to carry forward, not just for himself, but for all those who had come before him, and for all those who would follow. Because in the end, true honor wasn't found in the medals or the ceremonies. It was found in the lives you changed, the people you inspired, and the values you upheld, long after the battlefield had faded into memory. And that, Andrew knew, was the legacy he was meant to leave behind.